Hi everyone. I think we'll make a start as it's a couple of minutes past 10 now. Thank you for joining this application seminar. This is for round 8 of the Green Heat Networks Fund. So just to go over a couple of housekeeping bits, the session will be recorded. The recording has started. After this session is finished, the video and slides will also be available to you. Please turn off your camera and also your microphone unless you're speaking. Please feel free to comment in the chat as we go along. We'll also take questions throughout the session, so you can type these in the Q&A box, which you'll find along the top of your screen, or you can raise your hand if you have a question during the discussion today. Just to run through the agenda, we will give you an overview of the Green Heat Network Fund. We will then run through eligibility. We'll then go through the application and assessment process, and including the application form. And then there'll be a final section just for some last minute question and answer. So I'll now hand over to Libby from Triple Point, who'll give you an overview of GHNF.
Perfect. Thank you, Megan. Could we go to the next slide, please? Good morning, everyone. So just to firstly introduce myself, I am Libby Carr and I'm a relationship manager at Triple Point. So I will be your first point of contact when coming forwards with an application to the Green Heat Network Fund. Triple Point Heat Networks were appointed in March 2022 as a delivery partner to DESNZ. And we are the exact same team that were the delivery partner for the Heat Networks investment project. I just want to give you a quick overview of the wider team. So as I say, I work for Triple Point and we are an investment management firm and are the project lead. We lead on the business development and investment management of the Green Heat Network Fund scheme. So we then have GEMServe, who are responsible for all of our events alongside the data and system management. They also provide the application support and most of the comms we send out to the market. We then have Asteros, who lead on the financial and commercial assessment and are the experts with everything to do with the application form. We have ACOM, who are responsible for the technical analysis and the assessment team. We have support available from the team at Amberside, who deal with most of our investor relations and provide some great support to the relationship management team. And last, by no means least, we have the clean tech law firm LuxNova, who deal with all things documentation and provide the legal and commercial support as well. Next slide, please. So for those of you that are coming in new to the Green Heat Network Fund, GHNF is a grant funding scheme with funds available to support new low carbon heat networks, as well as the decarbonisation or expansion of existing networks. The scheme is open to all organisations responsible for the development of heat networks. So this includes public, private and third sector organisations such as the MOD and MOJ. Funding is available for commercialisation only, commercialisation and construction, or construction only projects in England. I would just like to mention, however, if you were to come forward with a commercialisation only request, you would need to ensure you have a fully funded construction project. And just to confirm, for round 8 applications, as you probably would have already seen on the application form, you are able to request funding out to financial year 27-28. Next slide, please. So one of the most exciting parts of the Green Heat Network Fund when it was brought to market was the commitment to market transformation. So as part of your application to the scheme, we're expecting projects to sign up and commit to various points which will enable growth within the supply chain. These are the commitments we're expecting of projects to critically help address that heat network sector skills gap. They largely fit into these 3 categories. So for infrastructure commitments, we're looking for those fair and open procurements. We want you to add to a reliable and resilient energy system through your project. Around skills, we want to identify opportunities to address that skills gap. Are there any particular elements of your project that will allow for certain skills to be developed? We want fair and open recruitment, and we want to understand how many jobs you think you will be able to create. So these could be full-time equivalent, training or apprenticeship opportunities. It's all of that sort of data we're looking to collect. And around innovation, we want to look at ways for your project to enable investment in research and development. And more importantly, and the most crucial part of these commitments, is the sharing of all of these learnings. DESNZ are expecting you to report on this, and hopefully through the projects we support through the Green Heat Network Fund, lots of wider learnings can go out to the market, as this will help with the build out of more heat networks going forward. You may have noticed the Market Transformation Commitment standalone guidance has now been incorporated into the Round 8 guidance. But all we ask is please do familiarise yourself with the requirements for your project ahead of submitting your application. Next slide, please. To give an introduction to UKIB, so we have been working alongside the team at DESNZ with the UK Infrastructure Bank. They are a government-owned bank, and we've been trying to help them simplify the process of providing funding to heat networks. It is important to note that we will be asking all Round 8 applicants to the Green Heat Network Fund to confirm via email that they are happy to be contacted by UKIB. So if you haven't done so already, please reach out to your relationship manager. This will allow UKIB to review the projects to see which will be suitable for their subsidised funding. This is a really exciting opportunity for all those local authority applicants out there, as the bank is able to offer preferential rates, and that is 40 basis points cheaper than PWLB. There are some minimum ticket sizes, so for local authorities, the minimum funding amount will be £5 million. The bank are also really interested in talking to private sector projects, but this is for the larger ones, as the minimum ticket size for private sector is 25 million. The bank are working on a number of other products for private sector projects. Examples of these are connection charge facilities, project gap funding, and early phase guarantees and loans. This is a really exciting opportunity that we have to offer here, and hopefully lots of our projects will be in conversation with the team at the bank over time. Next slide, please. So also a note on Beehive, and hopefully a lot of you have heard of Beehive before, but just to confirm, Beehive was designed to help create the conditions for private investment in heat networks. Public funding definitely can't get all of these heat networks built, so we need to rely on drawing in private investment. So what is Beehive? Beehive is a PCR compliant dynamic purchasing system to procure active capital. It is open to public sector heat network owners and developers in both England and Wales. The funding categories available under Beehive are divided into two lots. Lot 1 is for equity investment alongside those equity related services, and lot 2 is for asset finance. Beehive can be used to finance a new heat network, expand an existing heat network, or refinance or sell part or all of an existing network. Beehive currently runs until the 31st of March 2025, and just to note, Beehive is separate from the Green Heat Network Fund, but it is designed to work alongside. Can we go next slide, please? Just to give you a brief example on how it works and how you would come forward for lot 1. So this is for those equity and commercialisation services. It really is a two-stage process. We already have investors onboarded onto Beehive, and in this example of a local authority using Beehive, step 1 would be to come to market on the platform with a project sufficiently well scoped that a joint venture partner can price up the services and understand what sort of investment is required. This can be done reasonably early in the commercialisation phase. It's a bid process, so you would then appoint your joint venture partner, and step 2 would be that the JV will commercialise the project through optimisation, design completion, negotiating the customer contracts, the supply chain procurement, and finally putting the funding in place. We have the team at Amberside working on Beehive, and if you would like to talk to them about it and find out some more information, please let me or someone else from the team know, and we can help organise a meeting. We go next slide, please. So just before the team go into some more detail of the application process, I thought it might be useful to mention some of the amendments that have been made to the Round 8 guidance. So firstly, around letters of support, there has been a revision made to the drop-down box on the customer tariff sheet, and this is for the investment assessment team and investment committee to understand the level of commitment that has been provided by each of your customers. You will see this in some more detail later this morning when Simon goes through the application form. But secondly, there has been some wording added that might be of interest for all of our local authority projects, and this is around routes to market. When submitting your application, the assessment team will want to see what your procurement route is and what planning has already taken place in regards to your route to market. I also thought it might be useful to share some hints and tips with you to assist with your application. So firstly, please remember that GHNF is a competition. The main driver for the scoring of the projects is the grant pence per kilowatt hour of heat delivered over the first 15 years. We understand that applicants need to apply for the grant amount that makes them commercially viable for the applicant, but the scheme is extremely popular, and as a result, the average pence per kilowatt hour of applications received has reduced round on round. To be competitive, I would recommend aiming for less than 2.5 pence where possible, and this is based on requests received in previous rounds. We urge you to think carefully about your spend profile. As part of your application, you need to confirm in which financial year you would like to draw down your funding. Please try and be as accurate as possible with this. If you are unable to spend your allocated amount of funding in that given financial year, not only is it lost to your project, but also to the Green Heat Network Fund scheme and the market as a whole. I've already spoken about the market transformation commitments and how important they are, but I would just suggest not to leave the MTC tab of your application form to the last minute. Please spend your time thinking about these commitments alongside the financials of your project. Applicants are expected to provide concept designs to REBA Stage 2 for the Energy Centre and REBA 2 equivalent designs for the pipework routing. Please just note, applications will be marked down and may fail the assessment if sufficient design development has not been demonstrated. Another aspect in which we would recommend applicants to focus on is the strategic value of your schemes. We want to see ambitious projects which offer significant expansion opportunities. Does your project have the opportunity to either fully decarbonise or partially decarbonise an existing heat network? Have you considered the role your project will have in helping to enable a wider zone? With a limited budget, our investment committee want to support projects that have the ability to obtain the greatest benefits. And finally, my last tip would be to please speak with us early. We want your application to come in as strong as possible, and early engagement will allow us to iron out any questions or queries you have ahead of submission. Next slide, please. So hopefully I've made it clear this morning, but my main message would be to please engage with the relationship management team as soon as possible. We can help provide you with access to the wider team, and we can go through any specific issues you have. Our inquiries email is on the screen now, so please do get in touch as soon as possible, and we will hopefully help make the application process as seamless as possible for you.
Great, thank you, Libby. If anyone has any questions at this stage, please feel free to raise your hand or put them in the Q&A tab, and we'll get back to you on those. So if there's no questions at this stage, we'll move on to eligibility. So this is with Peter from ACOM.
Thank you, Megan. Good morning, everybody. Next slide, please. So what is eligible for funding under the Green Heat Networks? Clearly, we will fund new low carbon technologies to supply heat and coolth. We'll also supply buildings and ancillary plant that may be necessary to enable that low carbon plant. And we also will fund the connection to resources. So if you have a water source heat pump, we would fund the infrastructure that, or could part fund the infrastructure that needs to be put in to enable access to the water source to be provided. Connection to things like energy from waste plants are also eligible. What wouldn't be eligible would be the energy from waste plant itself, because obviously that has an alternative purpose that is actually being built for disposing of waste and generation of electricity, will only fund the heat network components of that connection. We'll then fund the heat network itself, the spines and main distribution network, up to individual buildings or individual customers. Where we have buildings that have multiple customers, typically residential buildings, we will fund some of the secondary distribution network costs depending on what these are. So what we're not here to do is replace end-of-life pipe work that exists but is effectively needs replacing because it's reached end of life. Ideally, we won't be providing energy efficiency improvements to existing pipework because there are alternative funding streams that can be used for those. But if you were putting in completely new pipework, we would support that. Or if pipework needed to be installed, new pipework needed to be installed because the existing wasn't of appropriate diameter or something similar because of the nature of the heat network that was being connected to. And we'll also fund the heat interface units with dwellings or heat stations with customers. What we definitely won't fund is works on the customer's side of those interface units. Those have to be funded through alternative funding mechanisms. Next slide, please. So one of the things that has changed or is relatively new to green heat networks is the concept of sleeving. Where we have an existing network, it may not be possible to decarbonize this all in one go, but it may be possible to install some new low carbon plant to serve new heat loads. So we can fund new low carbon plant and the connections to new heat loads under a sleeving mechanism, with the carbon benefits being sleeved through the existing distribution network. When we talk about new connections here, we're talking, it doesn't have to be a new building in the sense of a new building. It can be just has to be a new customer to a heat network. So somebody can be existing building but it just has to be one that isn't already connected to the heat network. And we need the minimum demand of a new additional 2 gigawatt hours per year in order to be eligible. Next slide, please. Another thing that's worth noting is that there may be situations where there are customers or there are applicants who don't have a single building or group of buildings that would meet the 2 gigawatt load on their own, but may have distributed a number of similar buildings that are distributed on a wider area that have been shown through a study to be suitable for a networked or even be that a communal network within a dwelling within a residential building, I should say, to reduce the carbon emissions of that group of buildings, and as long as the total sum is 2 gigawatts or more of heat demand, we can aggregate those buildings together to form a single application. Again, I would recommend early contact with the relationship managers if you have an application like this to talk through how we can do that. Next slide, please. Ambient loops, shared ground loops are becoming more common in applications. The intention here is for heat to be distributed at a low temperature, an ambient temperature, and for individual customers to have their own heat pumps to raise that to the raise that heat to the temperature they need within their buildings. The main difference between ambient loops and shared ground loops is really a matter of scale. Ambient loops would typically have some form of common plant, whereas a shared ground loop will at most have a pumping station, but may not even have that. In both cases, it's important that we get the carbon and customer detriment calculations correct. So we need to take into account the electrical energy that is used within the customer heat pumps and also the carbon emissions that go with that. So there is a relatively simple way of ensuring that we capture all the information correctly, and again, contact the relationship management team, and they will put you in touch with a technical team who can help you fill out the application form correctly to meet this case. Next slide, please. New build residential is now becoming being required to provide a low carbon solution to the heating supply, and as such we need to see that your proposal to connect new build residential to a heat network offers an advantage over an air source heat pump as a typical counterfactual, so that we show additionality for the funding that is provided by green heat networks. So we will automatically do a test of the carbon savings from your proposal against a blended counterfactual. So that will be gas for existing buildings being connected, and air source heat pump for new buildings being connected. And provided that you are showing a saving, then that will be beneficial. If you are unable to show a saving against that blended counterfactual, then we will be looking for information to show that your scheme is in some way strategic, and therefore offers additional benefits over and above alternative low carbon solutions. And those might be that they reduce the overall electrical infrastructure requirements. They might unlock significant future carbon savings by being a step on a route to wider networks. But all evidence for that does need to be backed up. It is not sufficient just to make a statement. You need to provide us with calculations. You need to provide us with evidence that supports your claims about strategic positioning of your network. If you are recovering heat, so industrial waste heat, then that is almost an automatic pass through of these tests. But what is not recoverable heat or recovered heat is air, taking heat from the air or from a natural watercourse. It has to be recovered heat from man-driven processes. Next slide, please. Eligible costs. So it's easier really to say a bit more about what isn't eligible for funding, where staff are employed for multiple purposes, so they're not dedicated to the delivery of a heat network, then we won't be funding those costs. But there are situations where we can fund staff costs, which are set out in the guidance. We won't fund sunk costs, as we've already said, we won't fund heating and cooling sources that have other functions, but we will fund the connection to those sources. We won't fund tertiary distribution systems. We won't fund changes to existing building fabric. We won't fund first-of-a-kind technologies. Again, there is guidance on if you have an innovative process that is new to this country, there is guidance about what we need to see to show that you aren't a first-of-a-kind technology. We won't fund VAT, and generally improvements to existing networks. Again, those are all covered by other grant schemes. We won't fund exclusively agricultural heat networks, but we can fund networks that have a proportion of agricultural buildings, but that needs to be really less than 50% of the total heat demand. And then there are limitations about biogas, biomass, and other forms of plant that may be receiving alternative grant funding or have restrictions on fuel supply. Next slide, please. As has already been mentioned, we want to know about heat customers' commitment to the project and what level of communication and information sharing has gone on. Often letters of support, letters of intent are very heavily caveated for obvious reasons and don't really show the extent to which communication and information sharing may have gone on. So in addition to the new customer connection form, in the application form, I would recommend that you provide us with a full explanation of what communication, what information sharing you have had with your potential customers, so that we get a full picture and fully understand where you are with the customer journey at the time of the application. Next slide, please. The same also goes really with for heat sources such as energy from waste plants or other sources where you have to get agreements and permissions for access to those heat sources. Where are you with negotiations? Do the heat sources understand what sort of level of tariff you're prepared to pay? Have negotiations got to the point of discussing contractual terms, so that again we understand more about, or we understand fully where those negotiations are. And similarly with people like regulatory bodies and highways, have we got the full picture? Have you provided all the information about where we are with negotiations with those bodies? Next slide, please. So when we actually make the application, there'll be an Excel main application form where most of the financial information is summarized. Will then be requests for supporting evidence, and there is a fairly rigid structure for providing that, and we do ask that you keep to that structure so that we can quickly find the information. As you can imagine, there's quite a lot of information provided for each of the applications, and it really does help the assessment if you follow the structure that we've provided. There are a whole series of required evidence, and then there is also some optional evidence to help boost your application, and then contingent evidence, which will depend on what your application is as to which of those may apply. Next slide, please. So your application has to pass a number of gated metrics, and then we will score the application and review deliverability to see that we are happy that the scheme is deliverable. So the gated metrics are carbon. Obviously, we need to exceed or be better than 100 grams of carbon per kilowatt hour of heat delivered. Something to note that going forward, the proposals in the future home standard and future building standards for connection to networks, it assumes a network will have a much lower carbon emission standard than the 100 grams. And therefore, if you have a significant amount of new build, or in order to expand, you might need to think a bit more about whether you need to get down to the sorts of levels that the future home standards are predicting will be in the comparator building that is part of the building regulations test. Customer detriment is another of the gated metrics. So for domestic and micro customers and micro businesses, the heat network mustn't have a levelized cost of heat that is higher than the counterfactual. This is automatically calculated in the application form, and if you are not passing that, then I would recommend speaking to the relationship managers to see what other evidence we can obtain to show that you aren't causing customer detriment. Social IRR, so this is taking account of carbon benefits, or monetizing carbon benefits and air quality benefits, as well as the financial benefits, needs to be greater than 3.5%. There should be a minimum heat demand of 2 gigawatt hours per year, or if you're in a rural location off gas grid, then 100 dwellings or equivalent. And this needs to be this load needs to be online connected within 5 years of starting construction. We can't fund 50% or more of the total eligible costs, so your grant application must be for less than 50% of the total eligible costs. And there is also the capped award, the pence per kilowatt hour of grant that you are requesting. And as Libby has pointed out, this is the main scoring component that will be used to rank the projects. We also have to, you can also include non-heating and cooling costs, provided they are shown to not cause any financial detriment to the scheme. So as long as the so for example, if you include a PV array, as long as that is has a positive benefit to the network financially, then that's acceptable. If the network is subsidizing the PV array, then that won't be acceptable. We then, as I said, will assess deliverability, and then provide some scoring adjustments, which can adjust the score by up to 30%, to allow for other benefits that you may include with your application around expansion potential, the volume of thermal energy supplied, innovation and energy efficiency. Next slide, please. Yeah, just to note a few other things that need to be included. So we've already mentioned REBA 2. It does need to be a level of design that allows us to feel confident in the costings and the development stage of the project, and projects will be rejected if we do not feel that the correct standards have been met. With zoning, we also need to ensure that projects do not preclude connection to zoning in the future, and there are some requirements around that for those who are not putting forward zoning projects regarding the future potential connection to a wider zone. And I just remind people that there is a requirement to sign up to the National Underground Asset Register, which is being developed. So the depends where they are in their development of that as to whether it's a pilot scheme or the full scheme that you would need to sign up to, which would enable your data to be added into the database about underground assets. Next slide, please. Okay, so round 8 is due to close on the 28th of June. If you haven't registered your interest, I suggest that you do so soon, and we will then provide you with a relationship manager contact and an area on our portal to upload and your information and provide you with an application pack. Next slide, please. The actual application process, assessment process, once you have provided your application and the window closes, we will then review the applications. We'll raise some clarifications 10 working days from the close of the window, and send those out. You will have 5 days to respond. There's then another review process that will take on board that new information, and we have another clarification window which will give you 3 days to respond. At the end of that, we will then draft our reports and review those with the department. There may be further clarifications which come up as a result of that, and again there'll be a 5-day window, working day window to respond. We'll then write the final IC reports with the investment committee, being targeted, I think, for the, going to say the 11th of September, but certainly middle of September. I just recommend that you ensure you have the necessary resources to respond to clarifications when they come in. It's your opportunity to provide that little bit of extra information if we clarification if we don't already have it. So please be aware of when these clarification windows are in, and make sure that there is a resource there to answer any questions that come to you. Okay, next slide, please. I think that's it. Yeah. If there are any questions, then we can take those otherwise we can move on to the application form.
So we've just had one through from Tom, which I've just posted in the question and answer box. So will you fund secondary system moderations to facilitate lower temperature operation?
Yes, we can. Those would be acceptable because they are linked with your low carbon solution.
Great. And then I
Any
think
others?
another one has just come through in the main chat. What is the median grant award in previous rounds in comparison to the 50% maximum?
That's a good question. It's not a very meaningful number because some of the grants have been very low as a proportion because of the nature of the ask and the nature of the scheme. But I would guess that somewhere around 20 to 30% might not be untypical at the moment.
Great. I can see Ibrahim has their hand up. I'll just enable your mic for you. There you go, Ibrahim, if you want to come in. Ibrahim, did you have a question? Okay, we'll move on to Myra. I'll just enable your mic as well.
I'm trying to talk. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Yeah. Just want to know, obviously, having just heard about the round 8 finishing in June, is there a round 9 expected, and when is that supposed to sort of come online?
So if we go back to that slide with the dates on, there is a round 9, and that is due to close in January 2025. We don't have an exact date at the moment, but it's due. There will be a round 9.
So we've had Ibrahim's question come through to the chat. So can you elaborate on the carbon gate?
Can I elaborate on the carbon gate? Okay. Not sure quite how you want me to elaborate, but the carbon gate is the carbon emissions associated with each kilowatt hour of heat delivered. It needs to be, for green heat networks, it needs to be 100 grams or less, and that needs to be achieved within 5 years of starting the scheme, or 3 years where you intend to have temporary plant. So if you intend to serve the initial heat loads with, let's say, gas boilers until such time as you have enough load to justify connecting your low carbon heat source, then you would have 3 years to connect that low carbon heat source. If you start with the low carbon heat source connected from day one, then you have 5 years to achieve that gate. I think the point I was trying to make is the gate was quite challenging when we started, but looking forward, the assumptions around the building regs that will be coming into force in 2025 are that you need to look to be considerably lower than the 100 grams per kilowatt hour in order to meet the sorts of standards that are being assumed in the consultation documents for those building regulation changes. I'm not sure if that provides what you need. If you have something more specific you want to know about, then please let me know, and we'll try and give a direct answer to that.
Great. A further question has come in. Can you expand on your point regarding integration with wider heat zones in the future? If a network contains oversizing of pipework in order to anticipate interconnection with another network, or the provision of heat to another network, or simply addition of heat demands in accordance with heat network zoning, then is this not accepted? It's within the chat, that full question for you.
Yeah. So this is more about a scheme not preventing connection to a heat network zone in the future. So any measure that oversizes equipment for future expansion, any measure that enables future expansion is fine. It is what we don't want to see is a network that is physically designed and or contractually set up such that it would preclude connection to a heat zone in the future. So it's more about not precluding connection than requiring particular measures to be in place.
Another question has come through. Does GHNF fund trial holes to prove district heating routes in the ground from REBA 2 onwards?
So we can trying to form the answer in a way that's succinct. What activities, apart from those items that we've just mentioned as not being fundable, what activities you need to carry out to prove routes, to design the network, and to install it are they need doing, and they're part of the scheme. So we won't it's a fundable activity. It's not something that we're going to give extra money for. It's not something that we're going to put money at risk for. So it could be done under commercialization, and that would be fine, but it would come out of your limit of £1 million for commercialization. Hopefully that answers the question.
Great. And then another one in the chat now. Will there be any additional funding options if you secure the fund?
Does that, okay. I think that means I'm not sure quite what that is really driving at. Could whoever's asked that perhaps expand a bit on what they actually mean on that?
Okay, great.
Please.
Of course, I think we're going to move on to the next part in our seminar. So I'm going to hand over to Simon from Asteros. If you have any further questions, please feel free to put these in the question and answer box.
Thank you, Megan, and good morning. Peter, in one of his slides, showed all the different aspects of the GHNF application that need to be completed to make it a complete application, and he talked about a main application form, supporting evidence, optional evidence, and contingent evidence. This part of the session is talking about that first one, which is the application form, which is an Excel-based workbook that it gathers a lot of information and data principally to carry out the calculation of the gated metrics. So that's what I'm going to talk through for the next 45 minutes or so. And I'll put up an application form and point you to a few features of it as we go through it. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a diagram of how the application form is put together. There are a number of sheets in there that have tabs that are yellow coded. They're input tabs. There's some input tabs that are asking for information about the applicant. There are and then there are a set of input tabs that are asking for information about the project itself, including information that calculates the gated metrics and calculates other metrics such as the market transformation metrics. So they're the middle block of tabs within the model. The input tabs feed into calculation tabs. The calculation tabs are also fed by some underlying assumptions that are in the application form, and the calculations feed into an output sheet, the GHNF output sheet. So all of the gated metrics that you are required to pass as part of this process, and the any gated metrics that form part of the scoring and ranking, principally the pence per kilowatt hour, they're all calculated from the information you put in, and the outputs are all shown to you before you submit your application form. And furthermore, all of the applications are open and visible, and you can follow through how they're calculated and what some of the underlying standard data is that we've used to calculate some of those numbers as well. There are also tests and flags within the workbook, within the application form. There are flags that show passes and fails, and the application form should be showing passes across the whole application form before you submit. And if you have a particularly sticky pass fail flag, please get in contact with us, and we can help you work through what might be going on with it. Okay, thank you, Megan. Thank you. Okay, so the main application form sheet. So I'll show you the main application form sheet in a minute, which is the one which collects most of the data and flows into the calculations. The main application tab within the application form is also provided separately to the application form, and it's provided unlocked. And what we ask is for you to embed that in your techno-economic model or your financial model somewhere, and then link the information through into your model. And what that enables us to do is to, for any particular number or any particular metric that you're providing us with, we can trace through what the calculations are and what the underlying assumptions are, and that helps us reduce the number of clarification questions we need to ask. I think that is also, most applicants find that a helpful way of populating that particular sheet if it's populated automatically from their financial model or techno-economic model. So that's the first thing. You need to provide at least 40 years of operational cash flows from the first heat or cooling. And the reason for that is that some of the tests or some of the metrics compare the project with a counterfactual, with a calculated counterfactual, and the counterfactual is based on 40 years of operational cash flows. So, for instance, if we're looking at carbon savings, we will have the total carbon for your scheme over 40 years compared with the total carbon for a counterfactual over 40 years. And if we only have 20 years worth of information for your scheme, it'll produce a completely spurious response. Now, that has occasionally provided issues where, for instance, heat networks have been contracted for, say, under a 15-year concession, but we will need to have a conversation about how best to deal with that if that's the situation that you're in. Please also be careful in relation to the units you use. Column F of the main application form states which unit we're after. So if we're asking for pound thousands, please don't provide it in pounds. If we're asking for kilowatt hours, please don't provide it in megawatt hours. It will produce some very strange metrics if the units are wrong, and we can spot that quite easily. But on one of the diagrams that Peter showed in terms of the assessment process, he showed 3 clarification stages. We don't want the very first clarification stage to be taken up asking you questions about or asking you to correct really simple things like this, because it loses an opportunity for us to ask value added questions if we just need to spend our time sorting out the application form so it's generating metrics that make sense. So please pay a little bit of attention to that. All of the pound numbers in the application form should be provided in real terms, so there should be no nominal inflation in there. All the metrics are real metrics. The IRRs are real uninflated IRRs. And again, we can spot where costs or income are increasing nominally, and we'll just come straight back and ask you to resubmit the application form with the numbers in real terms, and that's kind of wasted clarification opportunity. I've mentioned already that there are error check messages and flags within the application form. There's a global check message, and it will go green and say pass when everything is passing. Please work your way through all of those, and please complete the checklist at the back end of the application form as well. There's a sheet in the application form that collates and asks for a little bit of information, descriptive information in relation to your project. DESNZ likes to collate that information and publish it periodically. And there's a tick box, a chat box that asks for you to confirm that you're okay for that to be published. We'd really welcome you ticking that so that it can be published. Thank you. And have check all the gated metrics are passed, and that your post grant project internal rate of return, which is one of the ways that we check that the grant has been sized correctly. So this scheme is essentially about recognizing that heat networks often or usually generate rates of return that are sub market or below what a sponsor would require, and the grant is there to take that internal rate of return up to an acceptable level for the applicant. We ask separately for you to explain what your target IRR, hurdle rate IRR is, and to justify it and to evidence why it's what it is, and then we check that the application numbers that you've submitted actually generate a post-grant IRR that A is consistent with what you said you need, and B is not what we consider to be excessive. And there's been a couple of questions, I think, about, or there's certainly been a mention of pence per kilowatt hour, and Libby's mentioned that the applications are now settling at probably below 2.5 pence per kilowatt hour. And somebody asked a question about the percentage of capex, and it's got to be below 50%, but they are. Most applications are now below that. So all we can really say in relation to that is don't request more grant than you really need. This isn't about trying to maximize the amount of grant that you can technically apply for and hit and be below all of the cap limits. If you're just below all of the cap limits, you'll almost certainly not be awarded in these coming rounds, because of how competitive it's now become and how the market seems to be delivering more commercially viable projects. Okay, and there is just to mention, there is there's a detailed general guidance document for the whole application process, which is very good and well worth a read if you're getting stuck on anything in particular. And there is also a separate guidance document, Annex 1, that is specifically guidance document that talks you through how to fill in various aspects of the application form itself. Okay, thank you. Peter's mentioned which costs are eligible for funding and which are not, and we recognise that there are projects, and this is fairly rare, but there are projects that have associated initiatives that are really closely tied in with the heat network. So there might be energy efficiency initiatives, or there might be solar arrays that are generating electricity for a heat pump, say, or there might be EV charging or other initiatives that are very, very closely associated with the heat network project. Now, whilst they're not eligible for their capital to be funded, it might be that those elements of the scheme are essential to make the scheme financially viable. So we can include income expenditure or you can include income expenditure and the capital related to those initiatives within the application form, within slightly separated from the rest of the information in the application form, and that feeds through to the internal rate of return calculation. But there's a separate test that's undertaken to make sure that by including that initiative, you are reducing the IRR. Sorry, that you are increasing the IRR of the project. So by including the initiative, the IRR is enhanced. It's generating a positive net present value to the project. That has the effect of actually reducing the grant needed to hit your hurdle rate IRR. The reason it has to be that way round is that if it's depressing the IRR, then kind of indirectly it would be supporting GHNF grant, which isn't designed to support these kinds of initiative. But I'll talk you through that. That probably wasn't particularly clear the way I explained that, but I'll talk you through that when we go into the actual application form itself. Next, please. Okay, let me share my screen now and have a quick walk through the application form itself. Just bear with me. Okay, Megan, is that okay? Is that sharing? At least let me know if it isn't. Okay, so we're on version 9.7 of the application form. That's the application form we're looking for you. That's the application version we're looking for you to submit. That's the cover page of it. This purple tab is the output tab. I've put like a small handful of made up numbers in this application form just so that it does the maths and calculates the numbers. Please don't pay any attention to those inputs. But here are the gated metrics within section 1 here, and they calculate what the numbers are. It shows whether you're passing or failing those metrics. In this particular case, it's showing that the amount of grant that's been asked for is generating a 2.3 pence per kilowatt hour. So that's below the 4.5% absolute cap, and also below the number that Libby was talking about, coincidentally. And the grant as a percentage of eligible capital costs is below 50%. This is showing an overall fail though, because we have a single fail on the minimum demand gate. So I haven't, whatever number I've put in terms of demand isn't sufficient to meet the minimum demand requirements of the scheme. So they're the gated metrics, and obviously the capped award we've talked about being one of the key metrics in terms of ranking your application against other applications. Then there's some summary outputs in terms of the grant requested, the shall I make this a little bit bigger, the internal rate of return that is generated by your scheme before you've had grants and then after you've had grants, and this number here should tie in some way to the hurdle rate that you've described in a separate document that you've submitted. So we'll have a look at that when you submit it, and some other metrics going down. This number, Peter had a slide on applications that are predominantly residential or new build residential, where we know that the current building standards require those schemes to be low carbon in their own right. So this can make it quite hard to pass some of the tests within the Green Heat Network application. So this is a further test in relation to is the predominantly residential scheme generating carbon savings over a counterfactual where a blended counterfactual where new build residential we take as an electric counterfactual, individual heat pumps, and existing residential we take as a gas counterfactual. So this is explained further in 4.6. That goes red if it's a fail, in terms of a little flag. Then we have some customer analysis. This is quite important. I don't have the data in here to show you this fully working, but here we have the levelized cost or the levelized tariff of your scheme is presented here, which is the kind of total annualized cost of the scheme, or the total annualized income from the scheme per kilowatt hour, compared with the counterfactual. And for certain customer groups that we consider to be the at-risk customer groups or the more sensitive customer groups, we don't want to see your scheme charging more than the counterfactual that we calculate. That isn't more than they're currently paying. That is more than they would pay under an alternative decarbonisation scenario, certainly for the new build customers. So again, the scheme numbers have to be lower than the counterfactual numbers. And then we have just some other information down here that you might find interesting in terms of how it summarizes your project, and that we find interesting when we're looking at analyzing your project as part of the assessment process. Okay, I can probably go through some of the other sheets a little bit more quickly now. So this sheet is about you as an applicant, so contact details, the name of your project, who's involved in it, email addresses, phone numbers, contact details, etc. So that's relatively straightforward. And then we have this sheet, which is a light touch financial viability assessment. So DESNZ doesn't want to provide a grant to an applicant that isn't of a certain financial standing, and that certain financial standing really is about ability to repay grant if the project doesn't deliver the outcomes. So there are there are clawback arrangements in relation to the grant funding agreement that are relatively complicated, and there's quite a bit of latitude in terms of the project delivering differently to what was originally applied for, but under certain circumstances there are clawback arrangements. So this test is really just about asking for some information about who the party is that's likely to receive that grant, and and what their financial standing is, and that should all be fairly self-explanatory. Okay, so this is the main application tab. This is the inputs that drive most of the calculation of the metrics within the application form, and this is the tab that I said we provide separately as a separate Excel workbook, unlocked, because this application form is locked. You can only enter information in the yellow boxes on the application form and can't change how metrics are calculated. So we provide you with an unlocked version copy of this sheet, and we ask that you embed this sheet in your model, and that your TEM or your financial model populates these numbers. Most people then copy and paste the values out of that sheet in their model into this sheet, so that we have a coherent application form. So this application form starts with your it's obviously by year, and it's by financial year, and it is by category of cost, or cash out and cash in, and there is some other information in relation to some of the technical information as well. So this top part is really the cash flow analysis. We have the grant requested, when you request the grant and how much you request the grant, construction grant and commercialization grant. We have a block of income, so total income to the project. And then we have a block of total expenditure for the project, categorized, and then we have capital expenditure split between generation, distribution and retail, and replacement capital expenditure or life cycle expenditure over the life of the scheme. So all of that information, plus this, this and this. So these are the three non Green Heat Network Fund scheme. So the PV arrays, your efficiency schemes, or other grants that you might have received. This is where you put that information, and all of this information effectively says what's your total cash coming in, grant and income, what's your total cash going out, capital cost and operating expenditure. Each year you have a cash flow position, and then the internal rate of return is calculated from that net cash position. So that's the block of information that drives the IRR calculation. This block of information just asks for, so this is domestic and non and micro business customer income analysis. So this asks for income summarized for a subset of your customers, the subset being those customers that we consider to be at risk customers, or the more sensitive customers, split between new build and existing customers. So this shows your connection charge, your fixed and your variable income for those, aggregated for those customer groups. And this information, we don't expect this information to add up to all of the income that you've presented up here. It might do though, and if it does do, then that suggests that your scheme's very focused on, or wholly focused on, residential. So we go back round that discussion that Peter had about those schemes that are focused on residential schemes. But in most cases, there's mixed customers. This is a subset of those customers, and this feeds into that customer detriment calculation, which I was showing you here. Let me go back to this. This is where those connection charge, fixed charge and variable charge, that information feeds through into there. So that's the customer detriment test driving data. Then we have some some actual values for fuel. So the kilowatt hour values of the fuel that you're using, split by fuel types, and that information will generate the carbon for the scheme, and will feed into the carbon gate of the scheme. So obviously the different fuels have different carbon metrics associated with them. So there's that information, and then and then we have some then we have the demand information for customers, for the subset of at-risk customers here, and this block is the peak heat demand information. Again, it's split between existing residential, new build residential, and other customers. This information is pretty important because it's the peak heat information that sizes the plant that we assume is used in the counterfactual calculation. So when we're calculating carbon savings, we compare the carbon that's generated by the scheme with the carbon generated by an assumed counterfactual, and the capital cost of that assumed counterfactual is driven from the peak heat demand. Undiversified peak heat is the metric that we're using. If you provide us with diversified peak heat, that'll be a lower number, and you might well end up in trouble in terms of passing of the amount of carbon that's saved by the scheme, because you're underpricing the cost of the counterfactual. So just pay attention to that being undiversified peak heat demand is what we're asking for here. And if you're really struggling with a couple of the tests that are comparing your numbers to the counterfactual, it might well be because we've got diversified instead of undiversified peak heat demand in that area. Then we have some further information, kind of technical information about your primary heat generation sources or cooling sources, and some other metrics in relation to the schemes, such as the length of the network and other bits and pieces that helps us to generate some comparative benchmarking type information. So that's the main application form. This one is fair. This customer tariff sheet is fairly self-explanatory. So there's 40 customers that you can put in this, and no ability really to expand it. So for the very large projects with very large numbers of customers, people tend to group customers by customer types. But what we've got is the name of the customer, the type of the customer, whether they're residential, micro business or other, the owner, public sector, private sector, industrial, etc., existing or new build, the number of connections, the number of customers, and then Peter mentioned this, that we have a fairly extensive list of what your kind of engagement with those customers has been. In terms of deliverability, we consider for fairly obviously, the more engagement you have made with customers right the way through to having signed contracts, the less risk around deliverability we will assess the project as having. So for each of the customers, we ask you to tell us what level of engagement you have with them. We have for each customer the undiversified peak heat demand here, connection charge, fixed tariff, variable tariff, and then the demand profile. And we'll see demand coming in as customers come on stream, and we'll see it ramping up potentially as time builds up. At the bottom down here, we add up all of the customer demand, and we check that this checks that the total that is analysed here is the same as the total on the main application form. And this is showing an error because I've put some numbers in terms of demand here, which I haven't got any customers for here. So that's why that's showing an error message. So please have a look to make sure that those errors are all complete. Moving on, the market transformation sheet. We ask for some text descriptive information and some metrics and some dates in here, which are around your your commitment to certain things like employing people and other initiatives that are beneficial locally, and and those feed their way ultimately into the grant funding agreement. And whether you meet the minimum requirements or not depends on the size of the project. As the project gets bigger, the minimum requirements get greater, and this is driven from the initial capitals, the initial stage capex, and that just pulls through the number from the main application sheet in terms of the initial capital, and then it classifies it as small, medium, or large, depending on the capex size. And certain questions open up, additional questions open up. I think they're great. I think you get some additional questions if you have larger projects. This was the publication sheet that I asked. I'm not exactly sure where you say that you're okay to publish it. It might be on the checklist, but if you provide a little description of the project, some core dates, and then this pulls through really summarized information about your project, and this is where you actually say, are you happy to include your capital values or not? Are you happy to include the IRR values or the demand values? And you can choose whether or not you want that to be that information to be published. This sheet, this cost benefit sheet is a kind of check sheet for those projects, those PV projects, those projects that are non-Green Heat Network Fund related. Most applications, the vast majority of applications, don't have that associated with their application. So you would think you could ignore this sheet, but you won't get a green complete flag or a green pass flag unless you just put what your internal hurdle rate is in there, and then then that'll and you might need to put kind of NA in some of the text boxes to start clearing some of the errors. So again, if you're having any issues with that, give us a shout. But that's relatively straightforward. But essentially, what you're putting in here is this is a check. This actually calculates whether there's a net present value, positive net present value from say you have solar panels to generate electricity. If you put the capital cost in, the income that you're receiving from it, and the operating costs, if that generates a positive net present value, you get a pass on this, and then it checks that the numbers tie into what's in the main application form under those three headings, the non-heat cooling. But as I said, most projects won't have that. If you do and you're struggling, give us a shout and we can talk you through that quickly enough. Finally, this checklist, this needs to be filled in before everything goes green. But what I'd suggest you do is fill in some of this, do some of this first. So do this first and last, because if you don't have an applicant type in here, for instance, it won't calculate all of the metrics through the application form. So just go through and fill in probably just this block up here at least first, and then and then come back to it to say, have you uploaded it or not at the end, as a way of making sure you've included everything in your application form. Okay, sorry, that was a whistle stop tour. Happy to take questions, but that's the end of my section, Megan. I'll stop sharing.
Great, thanks, Simon. So we have a couple of questions that have come through to the Q&A tab. I'll just pop the first one through for you. So when you say applications are setting a 2.5 pence per kilowatt hour, do you mean tariffs charged to customers or grant requested per kilowatt capacity installed?
Very much the latter. Well, not quite the latter. It's not the amount charged to customers, that metric. It is the grant divided by the amount of heat supplied to customers. Not the capacity or the peak heat demand. So it's the total demand divided into the total grant. Gives you a pence per kilowatt hour of heat supplied.
Great. We've got another question that says the counterfactual cost calculations mentioned were specifically for new build and based on alternative low carbon supply. Is this the same for existing buildings, or is the existing building counterfactual cost based on gas boilers as per the blended carbon counterfactual comparison?
Existing are the counterfactual is gas. New build, the counterfactual is electric. All the way through the application form for any purposes that the counterfactual is used.
Great, thanks, Simon. And final one we've had come through, please feel free to raise your hand or post any other final questions within the Q&A tab. So the final question is, how will consumers consider to fall under a required to connect obligation, I think as per the zoning regulations, to be considered in a GHNF application?
Hi, yeah, I'm just
Yes.
typing an answer to that now, which I'll finish off. But so at the moment there are no zoning regulations, and therefore Green Heat Networks doesn't preclude the inclusion of heat loads that may come under the zoning regulations in the future. If your requirement to connect is due to planning, then it will depend. If you are obliged to connect under a 106 agreement, then you would have to show why that connection was offering additional benefits over and above what would be required by the 106 agreement. If planning obliges connection, or at least negotiation with heat networks in a more general sense, then usually that's okay, because there's nearly always the clause that says provided it's economically viable to do so. It depends, but at the moment zoning, there are no zoning regulations, and therefore heat loads don't get influenced by that.
Great, thanks, Peter. I can see Ibrahim has the hand raised. I've just unmuted to you, so if you wanted to come in and...
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, sorry about earlier. I had a few mishaps with my Teams application, so I just had to update it and log back in. So my question goes back to my previous question. It's just a follow-up regarding the carbon gate. I'm not sure if Simon is in the best place to answer. But so regarding the carbon gate metric of, I think, 100 grams per kilowatt hour, if I'm not mistaken, is it relating to carbon offset from the clean energy technology that you are incorporating into the heat network, or rather the carbon impact of whatever low carbon heating technology you are incorporating into the heat network? So maybe an example will clarify this. So for example, if a heat network is looking to incorporate solar thermal into their heat network, so that carbon gate metric, is it referring to the amount of carbon offset from the solar thermal? In that case, I reckon it should rather be higher, would be preferable. But I think the metric says lower is preferable, so which I believe is something related to rather the carbon impact of whatever low carbon technology you are incorporating into the network. Would you be able to clarify this? Thanks.
Do you want me
Yeah,
to answer that, Simon? Or
yeah, no problem. It's a simple metric to get your head around. Really, it takes the total amount of carbon that is generated by consuming the fuel that is consumed. So the applicants tell us what fuel is needed to generate the heat that is supplied, including the losses from distributing it. So by fuel type, how much fuel is consumed to generate the output of heat that the scheme produces, and the different fuel types, each of them generate different amounts of carbon. So that then calculates the amount of carbon that is generated by the scheme to deliver the heat that is delivered to customers, and it's the ratio of the amount of carbon generated to the amount of heat that is supplied. So how much carbon is generated for a kilowatt hour of heat that is supplied to customers by consuming the fuel that you consume to generate that heat.
Okay, so in the case of a clean technology like solar thermal, it will be more or less negligible, considering that it's a renewable energy technology. I mean, there are some parasitic energy requirements like for palms, electricity for palms, but that's like quite negligible. So am I right to say that in the case of very clean energy technologies, it's more or less negligible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great. We've had another question come through that says, regarding the mandatory section in the SharePoint 1.19 and 1.21, can you clarify that local authorities need to submit financial accounts?
Yes, please. It's not a disaster if you don't. They're always available publicly. But yes, please.
Great. That's all the questions we have. If there are any final ones, please feel free to raise your hand. So we'll just run through kind of the final few slides we had. Oh, Myra, do you want to come in? One moment. There we go. Yep, Myra, you're unmuted.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, can hear you.
I don't know what if you got that. In terms of round 9, is that just the end of the fund, or does it get regularly topped up? Just worried that we might be right at the tail end of this. Do we know? Because I can't find any information online about beyond round 9. So I wonder whether that's just the end of the fund or the end of your assignment, or how does it work? Thanks.
Sure, I can see Amy's just come back to you in the chat.
Oh, sorry.
So no, don't worry. She just said, unfortunately not. Remaining funding is subject to various factors, such as what's requested per round and progress of funded projects. So unfortunately not kind of confirmed.
And we don't know how much is left or anything like that?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think we can confirm that.
All right, no worries. Thank you. Thanks.
Of course. Ibrahim, I'll just enable your microphone.
Yes, thanks. Yes, this question is just also with regards to one of the gated metrics, the financial one, the limitation of to 4.5 pence per kilowatt hour. Are you giving the financial metric much more precedence over that of the impact, actually, the environmental impact of the low heating carbon technology that you would be incorporating? So for example, say solar thermal again, is a relatively more capex intensive technology, but however, it could have very significant reductions in terms of carbon abatement. So in this case, would it be, I mean, lower is better, and you did recommend that 2 pence per kilowatt hour, is it 2.5 is what applicants should be aiming towards. But is it okay for an applicant to use the maximum of 4.5 and then calculate the amount of funding that would be required? But then that would probably put them at a disadvantage compared to other competitors for the application. So I'm just trying to find out, is there kind of like a balance between the impact of the technology as against the amount of funds requested from the scheme?
I think I can be fairly direct and say no. It is as exactly as described is how it will be assessed, and there are, when the scheme was designed, there are reasons why that decision was taken. In a sense, what that's saying is, the less grant is needed to get more heat supplied through a heat network, the better. So the further it goes, the more heat networks are implemented, the quicker when the government is moving towards its target of 18% of the heat to be supplied through heat networks, etc., etc. So that's kind of the business case. And then the carbon gate is what deals with the carbon. It's like, well, if it's, we don't want heat delivered through a heat network at high carbon intensity, but as long as it's at a below the carbon intensity that the scheme rule says, which is 100, then what we're saying is we're prioritizing schemes that deliver more heat for less grant over schemes that deliver less heat for more grant. That's just how the scheme rules are.
Great. Thanks, Simon. I think that's all the questions that we have then for today. Just to go over some final bits with you, please visit our website and fill in the contact form and you'll receive updates from us. Our website is linked there. Please also email us with any questions or to be added to our mailing list. This is inquiries@triplepointheatnetworks.org, and you can also follow us on social media. There's further support available through the application guidance, which covers the scheme eligibility and scoring criteria, funding requirements, evidence, supporting documentation, and the application process. The GHNF application form may be updated for subsequent application rounds. So if you've previously received an application form, please email us to check that you have the latest version of this form. Within the application form, there's a detailed application within the guidance. You can request this by emailing our email address there. As mentioned before, we will send out all of these slides to you, so you'll have access to the links and the different email addresses. So that's it from us today. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Please email us, as mentioned, if you have any further questions. Thank you.